to think about. People lost their lives, and men were put on trial in defense of their own lives. And so I have told both Wes and Kevin that we are expecting an authentic argument from them both. And now, to set the stage, March 5th, 1770 was a cold winter night in the city of Boston, and on that night, British Private Hugh White stood guard in the snowy, moonlit streets in front of the custom house where the king's money was stored. He had some words with a local boy who, according to some reports, went running off, bruised and crying. An angry crowd of civilians began to form, and Private White called for help. Captain Thomas Preston and 7 soldiers of His Majesty's 29th Regiment responded that evening. Then the old brick church house bells began to ring. These bells were normally used to signify a fire, and people poured out into the street asking the question, "Where is the fire?" This situation grew more and more tense as the crowd pressed in. The law at the time forbade these soldiers from firing without the order of a magistrate. Someone yelled the word "fire," and shots rang out into the crowd, killing 5 and wounding 6. And the question that has been asked for over 2 centuries is, did Captain Preston give the order to fire, or did he not? Attorney General Jonathan Sewell returned a grand jury indictment of Captain Preston and his 8 men. The men were put on trial for the capital crime of murder, a conviction for which would have brought them the death penalty. 4 judges presided over the case that was tried to a jury of 12 men. The people of Boston cried out for justice for the death of their 5 citizens, and the acting governor addressed a hostile crowd that fateful evening from the balcony of the Custom House. And the acting governor stated, "I will live and die by the law. The law must have its course." With that, Your Honor, I will leave the matter to the court. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Attorney Monaco. All right, ladies and gentlemen, just to set the scene, before we begin the trial, we're going to have, I should indicate, as the trial proceeds, you'll hear from both counsel. Then at the conclusion, my colleague, Judge Handy, is going to lead the jury deliberations and help us engage in a discussion of the meaning of this case and the importance of it. So, are counsel ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, for the Crown, could the counsel identify himself?
I'm Kevin Kane, Your Honor, representing the Crown.
All right, good morning. And for the defendants?
I thought I was John Adams, Your Honor.
Would you like to have your clients present?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, would the marshal please bring the defendants from the brig?
I don't know. I haven't read
Good?
Yeah, good. Supposed to be convincing that. Oh, yes, that's right.
The tension is palpable. The defendants seem to have been misplaced.
I hope they haven't been executed already.
It appears that all the defendants are present. Mr. Kane. For the Crown.
Thank you, Your Honor. started out by misidentifying myself. My name's really Samuel Quincy. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've been here patiently listening to the evidence for a couple of days now, more than a couple of days. This is the longest trial that's occurred in the history of this colony. You were called here some 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, if I remember right, and you were strangers. You were brought here for jury duty, probably not eager to do it, but you recognized your duty as citizens and you were called here. We talked to you a bit during the voir dire and asked you some questions. And among the questions we asked you was whether or not you keep an open mind, whether or not you put aside any feelings or attitudes or biases that you had before you were called here. The world and the city is rife with feelings and emotions about this trial. And we asked you if you would all come in here and put those feelings aside and judge this case and judge the facts of this case based on the evidence that's presented to you in this courtroom, that was presented to you in this courtroom. You've listened to the testimony carefully. I've watched you on occasion as you have listened, and you've been attentive and you've paid attention. In a little while, Judge Holzberg will instruct you as to what the law is in this case and how you must apply that law to whatever facts you find or don't find. Now, when you do that, remember, it's your job to determine the facts of the case. So I said you were called here, and you're one of the people. Actually, we talk about how important the court system is. The court system is really founded on you people. Citizens who come here who are not part of the court system, who are not lawyers, who are called here to use your common sense and use your judgment and use your life experience and evaluate the testimony and evaluate the facts. In a little while, you will go into the jury room to deliberate. You close the door and you'll sit and you'll look at each other and say, how do we proceed? Well, you'll figure it out. You'll elect the foreman and then you'll decide to deliberate. And when you do, talk to each other. Each of you will be surprised as you go along. Some of you will remember some things sharply. Others will remember other things sharply. And as you talk, you'll refresh your own recollections. And those recollections will be your recollections as you talk about the evidence. Pay attention to each other and what each other says, because each of you may have a slightly different perspective, or look at something in a slightly different way than you yourself have looked at. And as you discuss, you'll do that. And together you'll come together as a jury. And together you'll make the right decision in this case. It'll be your own decision because you have to be unanimous. But as you help each other refresh your recollections and make sure that you've looked at everything from all perspectives, you'll come to the right verdict in this case. You've taken an oath to apply the law, to apply that as best as you can and to find the facts in this case. And that's exactly what I'm sure you'll do. Now, when you decide what facts to accept, you've heard a wide range of testimony here, some conflicting, some consistent. You've heard testimony that maybe have some facts that are very solid. Just by looking at the testimony, there are very solid facts in this case, which we'll get to in a minute. There are other facts that you may have to look at and see how they fit in with other facts. Are they consistent? Do they fit together? Do they jive? And that may help you decide what facts to accept. But as I said, talk to each other when you do this. Now think about some of the fundamental facts and then think what conclusions can you draw from those facts. You've heard a considerable amount of testimony about the animosity between the townspeople and the soldiers that have occurred over the past 2 years. This 29th Regiment was occupying Boston as a police force. They were taking people's jobs. There was bad feelings among the townspeople towards them. But there was especially bad feelings among them towards the townspeople. You've heard several different witnesses testify about that, about their attitude. You heard Samuel Hennings testify about one of the defendants named Kilroy, who said that who described how Samuel Hennings described how Kilroy said he'd never miss an opportunity to fire on the inhabitants of the city of Boston. You've heard testimony from another individual whose name was John Wilms, who described a corporal named Christopher Rumbley, not a corporal, but another soldier named Christopher Rumbley, who described how eager he would be to shoot citizens of Boston. So there's animosity. This is background. Because there's hatred or animosity doesn't mean they did it, but this is background for you to consider the events of what happened that night and what led up to that night. You've heard testimony about an incident that occurred earlier at the rope factory called the Rope Wall, where It's quite clear from the testimony of some of the witnesses who testified to you that the workers in the rope walk insulted the soldiers, verbally insulted the soldiers. At least one of the soldiers, and the soldiers took great offense at that and came back with clubs challenging the rope walkers to come out and fight them on the streets. You've heard testimony from another individual named Matthew Adams, who testified that that night, the night of the rope walk incident was on March 2nd. On March 5th, 3 days later, Matthew Adams testified that another corporal named Corporal Purcell told him that day that he should go home that night and stay in his house to avoid the trouble that was going to occur, that the corporal said was going to occur because the soldiers of the 29th Regiment wanted to get revenge on the rope walkers for insulting them before, and he told Matthew Adams to stay in his house. Now that's background, as I said, but it's background that sets the scene, because you have to think about how the other testimony fits in with that. Now what happened that night? What happened that night? As you heard, there was a guard, a sentry, posted outside the customs house, and he became involved in a verbal altercation with a young boy, who sent him off bruised and crying as a result of an altercation that occurred. The boy went down the street. That was Hugh White, was the sentry. The boy went down the street, and then an angry crowd came out. A group of people. How big the crowd was, it was a little uncertain and it's a little conflicting, but they came out. And Hugh White, the sentry, called for help. Captain Preston came with 7 men, Preston himself and 7 men, and Hugh White made 9 people together. Captain Preston had a sword. The other soldiers all had muskets. Now think about this a bit. These muskets were single shot, muzzle-loading muskets. And to load them, you had to put in a ball and powder and ram it down with a ramrod, and then it fired 1 shot. Now, when the shots started out, 5 citizens of Boston ended up dead, 6 more were wounded, 11 shots. It's possible that one bullet hit more. It is possible. It's a little unclear, but certainly not more than that. So how many soldiers were there that fired those shots? It's clear that 1 or 2 didn't fire all of those shots. The question is, one of the questions before you is whether or not Captain Preston gave the order to fire. There's conflicting testimony. Some people say he did. 2 witnesses testified that they looked right at him, that they heard him give the order to fire. Captain Preston himself says he didn't give the order to fire. Other witnesses said they heard a voice behind Captain Preston give the order to fire. Well, it may be important if you believe that he fired that shot. It certainly is important if you believe he gave the order to fire. Possibly, because there's one issue that we'll have to get to in a minute. But if you believe that he gave the order to fire, you did. But that's not essential. If he brought the people out there, one thing's very clear. Nobody heard him say, "Hold your fire." Nobody heard him say, "Stop shooting." Nobody heard him give a command to after that first shot was fired for whatever reason, nobody heard him say, "Hold your fire." He didn't say a word. You've heard testimony that people were throwing ice and snow and snowballs and rocks. None of the citizens had weapons, they had guns. As I said, Captain Preston had a sword, they all had muskets, and they all had bayonets on the end of their rifles. And the bayonets were charged, were fixed bayonets. Weapons there. You haven't heard any evidence of any soldier hurt. There was some evidence that a soldier was knocked down. Captain Preston doesn't say that, though. Captain Preston says he turned at one point and saw a soldier hit with a piece of ice or snow and step to the side and fire a shot. And Captain Preston maintains that he turned around and said to that soldier, he was out standing in front of his men when this incident occurred. Captain Preston maintains that after he heard the shot and saw what he just described, he turned and said to that soldier who fired the first shot, "Why did you fire the shot? Why did you fire that shot?" Evaluate that a bit and talk about it when you get in there and ask yourselves whether or not that makes sense, whether or not that's a reaction. If he didn't whether he gave the order to fire or not, he certainly didn't say, "Hold your fire." There's no evidence, and we've had description of some of the behavior of this crowd. There's